On the island of Crete, surrounded by warm turquoise water and steep white cliffs that caught the morning light like pale gold, there once lived a brilliant inventor named Daedalus, whose skilled hands could shape wood, bronze, and stone into wonders few others could even imagine. His workshop, tucked into a quiet corner near the palace grounds, was filled with half-finished mechanisms, coils of rope, and the gentle, constant scent of cut cedar and warmed metal. Beside him grew his young son, Icarus, a bright and curious boy who watched his father work with wide, admiring eyes, never quite able to sit still for long. Icarus loved nothing more than trailing behind his father through the workshop, touching things he probably shouldn't, asking questions faster than Daedalus could ever hope to answer them, filling the quiet stone room with restless, youthful energy. The island of Crete itself moved at its own unhurried pace in those years, fishing boats drifting lazily along the coastline each morning, olive groves stretching gently across low, rolling hills, and market stalls filling the town square with the soft murmur of everyday trade. Daedalus and his son were simply another quiet part of that rhythm, known throughout the island for the inventor's remarkable skill, though few truly understood the full extent of what his mind was capable of building. It was the island's king who eventually called upon that skill for something far larger than any previous commission. He asked Daedalus to design and construct a vast and winding labyrinth, an elaborate structure of endless stone corridors meant to contain a fearsome creature deep within its confusing, twisting heart. Daedalus poured months of careful thought into the project, each corridor deliberately confusing, each turn calculated to disorient anyone who might wander too far inside. The labyrinth, once completed, became something of a quiet local legend, whispered about by townspeople who had never seen it themselves but understood, vaguely, that something both remarkable and unsettling now existed beneath the palace grounds. Daedalus returned to his ordinary workshop life afterward, assuming, perhaps too easily, that his part in the matter had reached its natural conclusion. But knowledge, once given freely, sometimes becomes its own quiet burden. The king, turning the matter over in his mind during long, restless nights, grew increasingly uneasy at the thought that Daedalus alone understood the labyrinth's secrets so completely. Such knowledge, if shared carelessly, or used by someone with different loyalties, could unravel everything the king had worked so carefully to contain. And so, without warning, without any lengthy explanation offered to either father or son, the king ordered both of them confined within a tall stone tower overlooking the sea. Guards arrived one quiet afternoon, calm and businesslike, and led Daedalus and Icarus up a narrow spiral staircase into a small, sparsely furnished room with a single narrow window facing endless open water. The first days inside that tower passed slowly, each hour marked only by the shifting angle of sunlight across the stone floor. Icarus, initially, treated it almost like a strange adventure, exploring every corner of their small confined space, tracing patterns in the stone walls, inventing quiet games to pass the long, unchanging afternoons. Daedalus, however, felt the weight of their confinement settle more heavily with each passing day. He had built the labyrinth to serve his king faithfully, and now found himself imprisoned as though his skill itself had become a kind of quiet threat. Night after night, he sat beside the narrow window, watching gulls circle freely above the tower, envying, at first only faintly, their simple and effortless freedom. The gulls became a source of quiet fascination for him, their wings catching invisible currents of wind, tilting slightly this way and that, rising and falling with what seemed like effortless, natural ease. Daedalus began studying their movements more closely as the weeks passed, noting how they angled their feathers, how they used the wind rather than fighting against it, how their entire bodies seemed built specifically for the sky rather than for solid ground. Icarus, meanwhile, grew restless within the tower's confined stone rooms as the days stretched into weeks. He traced his fingers along the walls during long, quiet afternoons, dreaming of open water and distant, unreachable shorelines beyond the island's rocky edges. Sometimes he would ask his father when they might finally be allowed to leave, and Daedalus, unwilling to offer false comfort, would simply place a steady hand on his son's shoulder and promise only that he was thinking, carefully and patiently, of a way forward. One quiet evening, as golden light spilled softly across the tower floor, painting long amber stripes across the worn stone, Daedalus began collecting feathers left behind by passing seabirds. He gathered them carefully from the narrow windowsill, arranging them in small, careful piles in the corner of their room, without explaining his purpose to his son just yet. Icarus watched with growing curiosity, sensing that his father's careful, patient hands were slowly working towards something entirely new. He recognized, even without being told directly, that this quiet, methodical gathering was different from his father's usual restless energy, that something important was beginning to take shape in the corner of their small stone prison. Over many following days, Daedalus arranged the feathers with quiet precision, largest near what would become the center of each wing, smaller ones toward what would eventually form delicate, tapering wingtips. He bound each piece gently together using warm, softened wax gathered patiently from the tower's flickering candles, melting it carefully between his fingers each evening as the light outside slowly faded toward dusk. Icarus helped where he could during those long working evenings, holding feathers steady while his father applied the warm wax, fetching fresh candles when the old ones burned too low, though he understood, even then, only a fraction of what his father truly intended to build. The process was slow, deliberate, unhurried, each feather placed with the same careful attention Daedalus had once given to designing the labyrinth's endless corridors. Weeks passed in this quiet, patient rhythm, the tower room slowly filling with the soft, sweet scent of melted wax and the gentle rustle of feathers being sorted and arranged. Icarus grew more curious with each passing evening, occasionally testing a single feather against his own arm, imagining, in small private moments, what such construction might eventually allow them to do. At last, after what felt like countless patient evenings, 2 full sets of wings lay finished upon the stone floor, catching the late afternoon light in soft, feathered ripples. Daedalus lifted one pair carefully, testing their weight and balance in his hands, turning them slowly to catch the breeze drifting gently through their narrow window. His expression, as he examined his work, carried a careful mixture of quiet hope and deep, lingering concern for what still lay ahead of them both. He understood better than anyone the delicate nature of what he had built, how easily warmth could undo careful craftsmanship, how narrow the margin truly was between success and failure in something so fragile and untested. He gathered Icarus close before their first attempt, kneeling down to meet his son's eyes directly, speaking slowly and deliberately, the way one speaks when a warning truly matters more than anything else in that moment. "Fly neither too low," he said gently, "or the sea's spray would weigh the feathers down, pulling them gradually toward the water below, nor too high, where the sun's growing warmth would soften the wax entirely, unraveling everything so carefully constructed." The safest path, he reminded his son again, always rested quietly in the space between those two extremes, a steady middle course that required patience and restraint rather than boldness or excitement. Icarus nodded eagerly at each word, though his young heart was already racing far ahead of his father's careful instructions, imagining open sky rather than fully absorbing the weight of caution being offered to him so seriously. Daedalus fastened the wings gently to his son's shoulders, adjusting each strap with careful, trembling hands, checking and rechecking the fit along Icarus's arms, before finally securing his own pair against his back. The morning they chose for their first attempt arrived calm and clear, the sea below unusually still, gentle waves catching soft early light in scattered, shifting patterns. They stepped together to the tower's edge as morning light spread softly across the calm water below, the whole island seeming to hold its breath in quiet anticipation alongside them. Daedalus leapt first, testing the wind currents carefully, his wings catching air in a brief, uncertain wobble, before steadying into something resembling controlled, deliberate flight. After a brief, breathless pause, watching his father steady himself against the open sky, Icarus followed, feeling the extraordinary, impossible sensation of open air lifting gently beneath him for the very first time. The wind rushed past his ears, carrying with it the salt scent of the sea and the distant cry of startled gulls, scattering from their usual flight paths. For a while, they flew together in quiet, careful harmony, father just ahead, son following closely behind, the island shrinking gradually into a small green shape upon endless blue water. Icarus laughed freely into the wind, the sensation of flight utterly unlike anything he had ever imagined during those long, restless nights inside their narrow tower room. Daedalus glanced back frequently, checking his son's altitude, calling out gentle reminders whenever Icarus drifted slightly too close to the water's rippling surface or slightly too high toward the warming morning sun. For a time, Icarus listened carefully, adjusting his flight path obediently, staying within that careful, steady middle course his father had described so seriously back inside their tower room. They passed over small fishing boats far below, fishermen looking up in open-mouthed astonishment at the impossible sight of two winged figures crossing the pale morning sky above them. They passed over quiet coastal villages, over stretches of empty coastline, over water so clear and calm it seemed almost to mirror the sky itself, in perfect, unbroken reflection. Slowly, almost without noticing it himself, Icarus began drifting higher, drawn upward by pure delight, rather than any conscious decision to disobey his father's careful instructions. The sun's warmth felt wonderful against his skin after so many weeks confined within cold stone walls, and the world below grew smaller and smaller, tiny fishing boats reduced to mere specks upon endless shifting blue. Daedalus called out to him from below, his voice growing increasingly urgent, but the wind carried much of it away before it could fully reach his son's ears. Icarus, caught entirely in the joyful, overwhelming sensation of unrestricted flight, barely registered the warning at all, climbing higher still toward the warm, inviting brightness above him. The wax, softened gradually by the sun's growing heat, began loosening its careful hold on the feathers bound so patiently together during those long tower evenings. Icarus felt it first as a strange, subtle shifting along his shoulders, a looseness that hadn't been there only moments before, though he didn't yet fully understand what that sensation truly meant. A single feather drifted loose, spiraling gently downward past his outstretched arms, catching sunlight as it fell. Icarus watched it fall with a distant, dreamlike curiosity, still not fully grasping the danger unfolding around him, until several more feathers followed, loosening steadily from both outstretched wings. Panic arrived slowly at first, then all at once, as Icarus felt his flight grow suddenly unsteady, his arms working harder against air that no longer held him quite as securely as before. He called out for his father, his voice small and frightened against the vast, indifferent sky surrounding him on all sides. Daedalus turned back immediately upon hearing his son's cry, wings beating urgently as he angled himself toward the spot where Icarus struggled against the failing wings. But the distance between them, and the speed of the wax continuing to soften and fail, meant that no amount of urgency could fully close that widening gap in time. Icarus fell slowly at first, then with increasing speed, feathers scattering around him like strange, pale snow against the bright morning sky. The warm air rushing past him carried the distant, desperate sound of his father's voice calling his name, though the words themselves grew fainter with each passing moment. He struck the water far below with a sound too quiet somehow for something so significant, the sea closing calmly over him as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Daedalus arrived moments later, scanning the water desperately, calling his son's name again and again into an ocean that offered no answer beyond its own steady, indifferent rhythm. He searched the water for a long while, refusing to accept what his eyes and his heart both already understood, diving repeatedly beneath the surface until exhaustion finally forced him to accept the terrible stillness surrounding him. Eventually, grief-stricken and utterly alone, Daedalus gathered what remained and made his way, slowly and heavily, toward the nearest shore. He buried his son quietly on a small nearby island, one that sailors would later name in Icarus's memory, a small gesture against the vastness of what had been lost that morning. Daedalus continued his life afterward, though something in him remained forever altered, his brilliant hands still capable of remarkable invention, but his heart carrying a weight no craftsmanship could ever fully repair. In the years that followed, sailors passing near that stretch of water would sometimes speak quietly of the young man who had flown too close to the sun, offering the story as gentle caution to restless, ambitious children eager to reach beyond what patience and wisdom might otherwise advise. The tale spread slowly across generations, carried from harbor to harbor, from one quiet evening story to the next. It became, over time, less a story of failure alone, and more a gentle meditation on balance, on the delicate space between caution and courage, between necessary ambition and reckless disregard for careful, hard-won wisdom. Parents told it to children not merely as warning, but as an invitation to consider carefully the narrow, steady path between extremes. And so the story of Icarus settled quietly into memory, carried forward through countless generations, not simply as a tragedy of a boy who flew too high, but as a gentle reminder that the wisest course through life often lies in that quiet, steady middle ground, neither too cautious to ever truly live, nor so eager for the sky that we forget entirely the fragile, careful craftsmanship holding us aloft.